Some interesting comments regarding Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans from Super Bowl Sunday. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com, credentialed member of the media, and your host of Locked On Bucs. And I want to thank you for your continued support of the show. Right now, you can become a Locked On Bucs insider where you get news, rumors, updates, and just general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Head to join subtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On this episode of Locked On Bucs, going to talk about Mike Evans, going to talk about the franchise tag. But first, Mike Garafolo had a few comments about the Buccaneers and their pending free agents, Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. We're going to start things off with Baker Mayfield. So during the pregame leading up to the Super Bowl on NFL Network, Mike Garafolo, along with Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero, we're dropping news and information about all the teams across the league. And naturally, the Buccaneers came up. So as the Buccaneers are looking to keep Baker Mayfield around for the next season and beyond, Garafolo said, quote, "Down in Tampa, Baker Mayfield slated to become a free agent. He would like to return. The team would like to have him back." New offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who worked with Mayfield with the Rams, said working with Mayfield was a draw to get to that job there in Tampa Bay. So there have not been substantive contract talks there recently, but there will be as we get closer to the start of free agency. He played for just under $7 million last year, but the price is going to go way up, end quote. Let's start with the negotiations. And Garafolo saying that that's going to ramp up as we get closer to free agency. Well, as of today, there are 29 days. So 4 weeks until free agency begins. That means the open negotiating window is in 27 days. The deadline for the franchise tag is 3 weeks from today. Those talks between the Bucs and Baker Mayfield are going to start this week. I am telling you, those talks are starting as soon as possible. I talked about it last week. If it's not Baker Mayfield, then who is the quarterback for the Buccaneers next season? Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill. Like, here are the free agent quarterbacks coming up besides Baker Mayfield, obviously. Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Mitch Trubisky, Tyrod Taylor, Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew, Tyler Huntley, Josh Dobbs, Easton Stick, who should have been a hockey player with that name, Carson Wentz, Trevor Siemian. Are you going to take any of those guys over Baker Mayfield? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And who are you going to draft at 26 at the quarterback position? At best, you're getting Michael Penix, which is not going to be a smart decision to take the worst quarterback in college against pressure and plug him in as a starter in his rookie season and then have him face off against NFL pressure, which he really only saw that level of pressure in the national championship against Michigan, and things didn't go well for him. You're asking for a season worse than what Carolina just had with Bryce Young. Are you going to draft J.J. McCarthy and start him from the jump? Good luck. Good luck with that. For the Bucs, it's Baker or bust, period. That's the landscape of the quarterback position right now. And you saw a guy that most people didn't give a snowball's chance to this year have a career season and lead a team that was favored to be in the running for the number one pick in the draft to the divisional round. The Bucs had 2 1,000-yard receivers last season. 2. Somehow, Baker lost comeback player of the year to a quarterback that played in 5 games this season, but still turned the ball over more than Baker did, who played more than any other quarterback in the league. Second quarterback in franchise history to have 4,000 plus passing yards and 25 or more passing touchdowns in their first year with the team, joining Tom Brady. The coaches love him. His teammates, especially Mike Evans, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, love him. They went out and they hired an offensive coordinator who came to Tampa because he wanted to work with Baker. That was the big draw, Baker Mayfield. If the Bucs are going to get this done prior to February 19th, which is next Monday for those of you keeping track, and prevent $2.3 million in his void years being escalated and applied to this year's salary cap, those talks, if they didn't already start on Monday, will be happening this week and may even ramp up over the weekend to try to get this thing locked down and done before Monday. If they lose that $2.3 million against the cap, there are other ways to get it back, so it's not a huge deal. It would help a little bit not having to go and utilize other resources to get that money back when you need access to that money for Mike Evans, for Antoine, for Hassan Reddick. For those that didn't watch yesterday's episode or listen to yesterday's episode, go back. I talk about that at length. But I'm sure the Bucs would like to get this finalized sooner than later because this is one of the first dominoes that needs to fall. Baker and Mike Evans are the 2 dominoes that have to fall first. You can have them go in either order, but those are the 2 top priorities. And let's be honest, Baker was everywhere. Super Bowl week, up in Adams, Rich Eisen, Dan Patrick, Sirius XM NFL radio. He was on TV. He was on the radio. He was on podcasts, and he made it clear Tampa is where he wants to be. He got caught on that hot mic talking about putting down roots and staying in Tampa long term, and we need to bring back a couple of these pieces and all of that got caught. He wants to be in Tampa, and he wants to be with Mike Evans. He has said time and time again, and he said it right after the loss to the Detroit Lions, he would take less if it means Mike stays, because Mike Evans is the engine that makes this whole thing go. If you lose Mike Evans, yes, Chris Godwin is fantastic. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But the combination of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is what helps make this offense be so successful, especially when they have a quarterback that they can rally behind, that they love playing with, that can get them the football. Bruce Arians was on WDAE talking to Ronnie and T-Crass saying Jason Light's going to figure out how to get this done. He thinks the Baker and Mike Evans are going to be back. He doesn't think that they're going anywhere. And we are going to talk about the Mike Evans side of the equation. That is coming up next here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. DoorDash went all out for game day and DoorDash stuff from all the ads to one lucky winner. Cars, snacks, even tax software, and somehow they pulled it off. I'm a little bummed that I didn't win, but I got to hand it to them. It was one heck of a delivery. DoorDash is the all-in-one app for your everyday needs, from restaurants and groceries to flowers and gifts. So the next time you're running low on dinner ideas, pet supplies, or just time, you can get so much more than you realize delivered. As I've told you before, my kids' schedules, especially right now in the thick of hockey and basketball season, it's crazy. And a lot of times I'll order dinner on DoorDash when we're headed home from a practice so that it's ready and waiting when we get home. So get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, or a consolation prize for your sad 49ers loving friends all on DoorDash. DoorDash, your door to more. Head to the DoorDash app to get everything you need delivered. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every dayers, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. It's a WTSP Wednesday. I'll be joined by Evan Klosky. But in the meantime, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Mike Garafolo also talked about Mike Evans on that spot leading up to the Super Bowl when they were on NFL Network. And he said, quote, "As for wide receiver Mike Evans, who has played for no one besides the Bucs in his entire career, remember, they cut off talks, Evans and his agent, during the season. That is expected to pick up negotiation-wise as we get closer to free agency as well. Now, the date to keep in mind, February 19th, is contract voids, which would accelerate over $7 million from 2025 and 26 into 24, which isn't a huge deal. But if Tampa could get it done before that, they'd like to do that." End quote. Again, we're talking about a guy that wants to be in Tampa, and Tampa absolutely wants him to stay. Evans is a Buccaneer for life kind of player. Baker Mayfield said it, that he is the ultimate Buccaneer for life. He deserves that. He's earned that. And we've seen other guys who should have been Bucs for life end up playing elsewhere later in their career. The two most obvious that come to mind are Warren Sapp and John Lynch. But we're talking here about the greatest offensive player in team history. And he's still playing at an elite level. You cannot let that end. There's no way you can allow that to happen. The fans may forgive a lot of things, but I don't think they could ever forgive that. And that's not the sole reason that you keep him, of course. You keep Evans because he's still one of the best in the league at what he does. You keep him because he has a chance to do what only one other receiver in the history of this game has done. And we regularly regard him as the greatest receiver to ever play the game. And you want to see Evans achieve that in the only uniform that he's ever worn. You keep him because of the connection that he and Mayfield had last year. And you know that the best chance that this team has to build off of the successes of last season, especially late in the year, is to keep those two together. Spotrac has an estimated market value of $23.8 million for Mike Evans, and they list him with comparable players as Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams. Those four players have an average salary of $27.2 million per year. Tyreek is the highest of those four at $30 million a year. Yes, age is going to play into these negotiations and the amount of money that a team is willing to spend. Evans is going to be 31 during the 2024 season. But again, I go back to Baker's Radio Row tour of Super Bowl week. On all of those shows, he talked about how Evans hasn't lost a thing. Baker said after the loss to Detroit that Evans hasn't lost a step. He's one of the best receivers. He might have even said that he's the best receiver he's ever played with. Evans told us in the locker room after that game how much he loved playing with Baker and how great of a combination that those two could be together. And he knew that when the Bucs signed him. Evans' last contract was 5 years, $82.5 million. That's a $16.5 million per year average. That was back in 2018. His AAV is going to be higher now because the salaries have gone up. The cap has gone up. The salaries have gone up. We're talking about a contract that happened 6 years ago. But the Bucs don't need to lock him in to a 5-year deal this time around. You can do 3 to 4 years at this point, but find a way to give him the money that he wants, or at least get as close as possible so that maybe he can come down a little bit off of his asking price and meet you somewhere in the middle to get this done, knowing that the money that he's saving is going to go towards an Antoine Winfield Jr. or go towards a Levante David or go towards a running back that's going to help Rachaad White out in the backfield. Evans has been one of the more selfless players for the Buccaneers, and he constantly goes in and restructures things and moves things around. And I realize that's not a huge sacrifice. He's still getting his money, but he has always been kind of a team first guy. He will do what he can to help the greater good of the Buccaneers franchise. So these talks are going to start sooner than later as well. I don't think the Bucs are going to get this kind of deal done before that February 19th deadline, unless they just tell Evans he can have whatever he wants. And they just absolutely cave to him. But we know the Baker said he would take less if it meant that Mike Evans would come back. And Mike is the kind of guy that's going to take a little less if it's for the betterment of the team, like I just mentioned. So you take a look, his career earnings are up over $110 million. He's not hurting for cash, but this isn't about cash. At this stage of his career, at this stage of his life, like we've seen from so many different athletes, it's about getting what you feel you're worth and the respect that comes with it. And that's something that I think really all of us can relate to. And sometimes it's hard to try to relate to someone when we're talking about a football player wanting $30 million a year, because that's the kind of money that most of us cannot fathom having that kind of money, not just annual salary, but in our lifetime. You are talking about generational wealth. But if you scale it down and you take a look at your own personal life and your own personal experiences, I think all of us can relate to what some of these players go through with that mentality. Every one of us has left a job that we felt didn't compensate us for the work that we put in or the value that we brought to the company. And we've all gone to jobs that were willing to pay for what we were worth or what we were going to bring to that company. Mike Evans is no different, nor should he be. But I do believe that the Bucs have the inside track and can get Mike for a little less than what other teams would be willing to pay if they can't get this thing done before that negotiation window opens up in 27 days. And I've said before, to my family and to my parents, there was a time in my life personally when I had a great job, but I wasn't making very good money. And I had the opportunity to change jobs and get more money, be placed in a position of a little bit more power. And the company that I was with, who I enjoyed working for, and it was one of the best bosses I've ever had in my life. That guy was incredible. I learned more from him in 2 weeks than I did in all of my time of culinary school. They came back with a counter offer that still wasn't quite as much as what this other place was offering me. So I left. And it ended up being one of the worst decisions I've ever made, because the grass isn't always greener. Sometimes money isn't the most important thing. And if you're talking about a negligible difference, like in my case, I think the difference was $1 an hour. And over the course of a year, it adds up a little bit, but it wasn't, looking back, it didn't justify my leaving. I would have rather taken that dollar less and stayed where I was than make the mistake of leaving and going to that place. So, the grass isn't always greener. Sometimes it's better to deal with the devil you know than the devil you don't. And I think the love and adoration that Mike Evans and his family have for not just the Buccaneers franchise, but for the city of Tampa that they've called home for the last 10 years are going to play a big part in this. But what desperate measures would desperate times call for if these deals don't get done? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Right now, the Boston Celtics are the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 260, while the defending champion Denver Nuggets are the favorites out of the West at plus 440. And FanDuel already has the odds up for Super Bowl 59 with the San Francisco 49ers as the favorites at plus 500. The Chiefs are plus 650 to three-peat, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are tied with the New Orleans Saints, Las Vegas Raiders, Seattle Seahawks, and Arizona Cardinals at plus 7,500. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot, maybe on the Buccaneers with those kind of odds, and you might just find yourself a big winner. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs. And let's keep this Mike Evans conversation going, because there's another deadline ahead of that open negotiating window, and that's the deadline for the franchise tag. Now, would the Bucs hit Evans with the franchise tag if they can't get something hammered out in the next 3 weeks? And honestly, that's tough. That's a really, really tough situation, because if they hit him with the tag, that will cost him around $28.4 million, and that's fully guaranteed. But now you run the risk of pissing off Mike Evans to the point that you have no chance to bring him back when that tag expires. Players hate the franchise tag. They hate it. And to use it on the face of your franchise of the last decade is going to sting in a big way. Again, it goes back to the respect and what they feel they bring to the company, or in this case, what they bring to the franchise. And using the franchise tag on a guy like Mike Evans is going to be viewed by a lot as disrespectful. So you take a look at it from that angle. And then also, it's probably going to be cheaper to sign him to a 3 to 4 year deal, probably even giving him what he's asking for, than what that franchise tag would end up costing at that $28.5 million. That's not an official number, but it's going to be right around $28.5 million. And so the Bucs, ultimately, you can't use the franchise tag on Mike Evans. It would make what appears to be a bad situation from last year's negotiations being cut off even worse. And even if you're using it as an exclusive negotiating tool, that still might rub him the wrong way a little bit. It's like, you didn't even let me see what other teams, value me at. Why would I do a long-term deal? I'm just going to play on this franchise tag and I'm going to get out of here. Just lock him up. For the love of God, just sign him to the deal, lock him up, and get it over with. But what about Baker Mayfield? When it comes to the franchise tag and Baker Mayfield, yeah, that's not going to happen either. The franchise tag for Mayfield is going to cost around $36 million. And a long-term deal for Mayfield isn't even going to come anywhere close to that kind of AAV. Now, this is one where you would feel comfortable using that tag if you haven't reached a deal to prevent him from hitting the market and driving up the price or potentially leaving. But I get the feeling they're going to have a deal done before that tag deadline on March 5th. But again, I just laid out for you the free agent quarterbacks. You have the New England Patriots, it was reported over the weekend, looking to potentially fill their quarterback position in free agency rather than in the draft. I think they would much rather have Baker Mayfield than Joe Flacco. I'm just saying, they saw what he did in Tampa last year and the resurgence of his career. He would be sought after. So you might go ahead and use that tag as a desperation move if a deal hasn't been reached yet, in order to prevent him from getting out into the market and negotiating with other teams. Then you get all the way up into July to work out that long-term deal. But if I'm looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and players that would be the most likely to get the franchise tag, which isn't something they use often outside of using it on Godwin a few years ago, the Bucs, resort to the franchise tag very sparingly. But I think we're looking at Antoine Winfield Jr. His market value could fetch him around $20 million a year on the open market, and the franchise tag would cost the Bucs around $16.25 million for this season. So you would already get a kind of a 1-year discount if you go ahead and hit him with the franchise tag. But this is the kind of player that you put the tag on and get that opportunity to work out a long-term deal all the way up into July without any other teams coming in and driving up the price. The Bucs need to sign Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield and Levante and Antoine and extend Wirfs and add other pieces in free agency to fill out that roster. So Winfield getting the tag actually makes a lot of sense because they know they'll have him for this year for probably less than what he would cost on a normal deal, but they also get 4 months of exclusive negotiating rights with him. And while Antoine Winfield Jr. may not be thrilled with the idea of potentially having to play on the franchise tag with no long-term security, which is really, that's the other big part. A lot of it's about the respect. And then another big part of it is about no long-term security. And they could go out there in week 1 and have their knee blown out. And then that affects the negotiations the next year. Again, see the Chris Godwin situation from a few years ago. But Antoine would probably be thrilled that his 1-year franchise tag would get him double what he made in the first 4 years of his career combined. So, that's kind of the good and the bad of it, right? He's not going to want to be only on a 1-year deal. And I don't think the Bucs would keep it a 1-year deal. I do think they would just try to lock him in with that franchise tag and then have a lot of time to work out that long-term deal. It's like, all right, we know we got Antoine at this $16 million mark, but now we can put our efforts and focus on getting Wirfs an extension. We can get Levante locked up. We can go out and we can sign Jerick McKinnon and bring back Chase Edwards and, sign this depth piece and this depth piece and this depth piece. Now we can go back to Winfield. We can work out this long-term deal, maybe even lessen the cap hit for 2024 on this long-term extension and allow us to continue to get more pieces in free agency if we need to. And this is a young guy who's getting ready for his first big payday. That's the kind of guy that you franchise tag. It's not the Mike Evans of the world. It's not the the Tom Brady's. It's not the Vita Veas. It's the guy coming off of his rookie deal that you want long term. You just need to buy some time and to make sure that no one else is going to come in and swoop him out from underneath you. With that, I'm going to bid you all a fair adieu. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, I will be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Evan Klosky for a WTSP Wednesday. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, and become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.